I'd like to bring to order the special board meeting of the WTA to discuss the zero emission fleet transition plan. This will be one of at least two presentations on this. There's a lot of material here, and so staff has decided to divide the presentation in half. So we're not expecting any decisions today. There'll be a lot to digest. Les, I'll go ahead and turn the meeting over to you.
All right, Vicki, do you want to do a roll call?
Sure. Yes, Davidson. And we do have Eric Davidson present. Donovan?
Donovan's here.
Hawkinson?
Here.
Huthman?
Here.
Cortice?
Here.
Lautenbach?
Here.
Lillyquist?
Here.
Padu?
Here.
Darwin?
Present.
And Mayor Fleetwood is absent. Thank you.
Mayor Fleetwood just walked in.
Oh, we did. Okay, thank you.
Great. All right, well, thank you. Michael said it very well. Thanks for your time. There's a purpose of today's meeting is to talk with our consultants on zero emission fleet transition study. As Michael said, there's a lot of information here, so we're going to try to push through about halfway through, which will take us through operational impacts and facilities, and then take a pause, digest, and then come back for another meeting to make sure that we have time to then finish up the information and then talk about potential courses of action moving forward. No decision today, and even at the next meeting, while we'll talk about near-term things, there are other things that balance with this. As the board has said, we want to transform, and WTA 2040 has things like transit-oriented development and rapid transits and potential expansion of on-demand and so forth. So there's a number of things that will balance with zero emission fleet transition and how we sequence and do those things. So those decision points will need to be done as we're finishing those studies later this year. But we do need a short-term plan moving forward. So that'll be kind of the main decision point. With that, Tim, do you want to kick off?
I just have a few words just as additional background and before I hand it over to Paul from Transpo, but I just wanted to ground the board a little bit on where we're at and the purpose for the study. And one is, as you know, we have 2 electric buses in our fleet currently, and we have 8 more on order, and then we have potential for 3 more, which would be about 15 zero emission vehicles, which represents about 24% of our fleet. So already making great strides in terms of that transition. So we feel pretty good about that number. And so right now we're kind of taking a deep breath through the study and trying to ground ourselves a little bit more on what we need to do to kind of make a longer term shift to zero emission vehicles. So we're starting with this study, and this is intended to provide kind of the research and implications of fully transitioning so that we have sort of the information to make the right facility vehicle, so we know what the costs are and what the emissions changes will be for the system. So this is not really a plan, it's more of a study. We're going to get into that in the next meeting and talk about our near-term plan, and then discuss kind of what we need to do to have that longer-term plan in place. So it's not really going to be a decision-making document at this point, but it will be a good resource for us to rely on for making those future decisions. Just to recap, this is we actually had a meeting of the board back in June where we talked about the emission technology, we talked about battery electric buses, we talked about hydrogen. We're going to go over some of that information today, just touch on that so we can kind of refresh you on that. And then, like Les said, this is the first 2 meetings, and we'll probably spend more time on what it looks like to transition in near term for us here at WTA. So with us is members of Transpo, our consultant team, and STV. Paul Sharman. I'm not going to introduce the whole team. They can introduce themselves, and if you can do that as you're answering questions, that would be great. Just
Sure.
introduce yourselves and who you work for. So with that, I'll just turn it over to Paul for the presentation.
All right, thanks, Tim. Yeah, great introduction. So just a reminder, I'm Paul Sharman with Transpo Group. We also, on the STV side, have another Paul, Mr. Paul Kaufman. So you'll primarily be hearing from the two of us today, and there are another of other members of our team here who may be chiming in a little bit as well. So I am going to go ahead and share my screen. I hope you guys can see this okay. Can I get thumbs up? Yep, great. Okay. So yeah, Tim gave a nice little introduction. So today, let's see here, we are just talking about kind of the first, maybe half of the study, looking at that, zero emission technology overview, kind of quickly touching on some of the policy that's really driving this. Obviously, Tim touched on WTA 2040, your own internal goals, but we'll touch on some of the other, local, state, federal policy driving this forward. Quickly mention some of the funding mechanisms that might be used to help you guys make this transition. I know WTA has already been very successful in procuring a number of grants to help get this process started, but we'll touch on some of those funding sources and then really kind of dive into the meat of the analysis. STV put together a really robust model that discusses, what the operational impacts are for this transition for a zero emission fleet. So, where battery technology is today, what that means for your route operations, and where we think battery technology might be going, and what the impacts are specific to WTA. And then we'll quickly touch on the site upgrades that would be required depending on which technology the WTA selects to move forward with, either battery electric buses or fuel cell buses, and what the implications are for your kind of site itself. And then hopefully we have some time for Q&A. I know we have a hard stop at 9, so we're gonna try to go fast here. But if anybody has a question, please interrupt me at any time. I'm happy to be interrupted. So in terms of the zero emission technology overview, there are, as I mentioned, basically two technologies that are in operations or exist today. So we got battery electric buses is the first one. You guys, as Tim mentioned, are already operating 2 of these. So there are currently 5 manufacturers producing BEVs in the US that are available for federal funding. So we've got those different manufacturers listed here. And I've thrown up here some quick facts about them, just kind of what they are, how they work, and how much they cost. So if you'll notice on here, a 40-foot battery electric bus right now costs about $1.15 million. I know Mr. Kaufman's going to chime in and say that he expects that number to jump up a little bit soon here, up to about 1.2. So note that these costs are continuing to climb. But just for reference, in comparison to a 40-foot diesel bus is about $520,000. So we're talking twice as much money for an electric bus versus a diesel bus. And then obviously the major consideration with operation of an electric bus is those ranges. So we're showing an existing electric bus technology where it is today. We expect a range of between 125 and 180 miles on WTA's routes themselves. That comes out of the route modeling that we'll talk about a little bit later. And that number is really dependent on a number of things. The ambient air temperature really affects the range of a bus. So in really cold weather, batteries do not perform as well. We'll talk a little bit about how there are some ways to deal with that. Then obviously driving up and down really steep hills has a big impact on range. So not like a traditional diesel bus, which would have about 400 miles of range per tank. You just take it out in the morning and drive it all day long and bring it home, and there's never a consideration with range. But with electric buses, that's kind of the main operational consideration here. And then in addition to that, so you've got the bus itself, they also require pretty extensive charging infrastructure. So we've got a nice little graphic down here that shows the 3 primary types of charging an electric vehicle. Your traditional kind of just plugging in like you'd plug anything else in. This is the way WTA is charging their existing electric buses. And then the other primary method is the overhead conductive pantograph. That's when you see a bus, pull in and you get the top-down charging. So you've got a big pantograph system that automatically deploys and makes contact with the charging equipment on the top of the bus. And that offers some of the fastest charging speeds. Charging an electric bus can take anywhere from an hour or two to 4, 5, 6 hours. And then the third technology there is that under vehicle inductive charging. That's like wirelessly charging your phone. That technology is a little bit more nascent, is not deployed as widely as the other two, but there are a number of manufacturers offering that technology. So those charging options range greatly in cost. We're showing a range here of about $150,000 to $700,000 per bus. In addition to that, $1.15 million, really dependent on the power output, the type, where they're installed, that kind of thing. So big range of costs there, but they do vary widely. And then generally with electric buses, we're saying they're cheaper to fuel than diesel. Electricity is a little bit more stable in terms of cost than diesel is. As I'm sure you're all aware, the fuel prices fluctuating wildly over the last couple of years. And while electricity prices are climbing, generally it is cheaper to fuel an electric bus than a diesel bus. So any questions there before I transition to fuel cell?
Yeah, I have a question. This price, $1.15 million, is it the current price for a bus?
Yes.
So what I'm looking at is what will be the price in 2030?
Sure.
And the range also.
Absolutely. Yeah. So we'll talk a little bit about the range in this one. And we'll get into some costing in the second half of the presentation, which is going to be a little bit later. But we did work with WTA's finance team to do some inflation calculations. So we assume a level of inflation for all the cost estimates that we will touch on in the second half of the presentation.
Thank you.
Yeah. So then the other technology is fuel cell buses. These are a little less widely deployed, or actually quite a bit less widely deployed at the moment in the US. There are 2 primary manufacturers making these things. These are even more expensive than battery electric buses. We're showing 1.25 million here, so an extra $100,000 for these buses. However, these have a range that we're advertising here is about 260 plus miles. So definitely more in line with a traditional diesel vehicle. These things travel a lot farther. Hydrogen has a much higher energy density than existing batteries do. So these things travel a lot further before needing to be refueled. These also require additional fueling infrastructure. We're assuming that if WTA does decide to go the fuel cell route, you're going to need a liquid storage tank. You're going to need to have hydrogen delivered to your site, and then it would be stored as a liquid and then compressed and fueled into your vehicle as a gas, much the way you would do with CNG or compressed natural gas. Those storage tanks vary widely in cost depending on the size. Our report estimates here are showing about a $4.5 million cost for one of those fuel tanks. And that would have the capacity to fuel about 50 buses. The major constraint with this technology right now is the commercial availability of hydrogen. It is very hard to get your hands on a reliable source of hydrogen at the moment. I'll touch on this a little bit later, that there are some things in the work to hopefully change that over the next 5 to 10 years. But it's very hard to get the quantities of hydrogen that would be needed right now for you guys to operate a fully fuel cell electric bus fleet. Any questions there? All right. So just to kind of summarize all of that, what we're calling the technology problem identification is this kind of quick at a glance chart here that shows the different challenges to operation on the left side there. So vehicle cost, infrastructure cost, those are both serious considerations with both of these technologies. In terms of range, we're saying that battery electric buses is a lot more of a concern for WTA than for fuel cell buses, given that they have a lot larger of a range today. And then we're talking about fueling logistics as well. Those battery electric buses, as I mentioned, take hours to charge those things. versus minutes to fuel a fuel cell bus. And then in terms of available fuel source, as I just mentioned, electricity is not currently constrained. There's no issue with getting electricity at the moment from Puget Sound Energy, but there is a serious concern about the availability of hydrogen, at least in the short term. So that's kind of the framework for where these technologies stand, things like that. Any questions before we kind of pivot to the next section?
I guess I have one question on electricity is not constrained. Is there predictions when it will be constrained because everyone's switching to electricity?
That's a good question. We're going to touch on that. Will be touched on. So we have some modeling about greenhouse gas estimates for your transition, depending on which technology that WTA chooses, and we'll touch on that a little bit. I will just mention quickly that Washington state law mandates that all electricity needs to be coal-free by 2025, needs to be net zero by 2030, and then needs to be 100% renewable by 2045. So we do expect some price increases as that transition occurs, but we're not forecasting any serious electricity constraint. The state is working closely with these utilities across the state to make sure that electricity is not going to be it's not going to be seriously constrained, because they know this transition is occurring, and I'm sure WTA is already coordinating with Puget Sound Energy, or will be very soon, to just discuss kind of what level of electricity they're going to need, and we will touch on that level here shortly.
Paul, before you just move on, could you stop sharing for a second, reshare? We lost video on this side.
Oh, better.
We were seeing it online and now it's gone.
Okay,
Yeah.
Go back to share again here. Can everyone see this okay?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
Can you hold on just 1 second? I'm gonna leave the meeting here in the boardroom and rejoin.
I saw no problem at my end on Zoom.
Okay, good to know.
Okay, we're back.
All good now?
Can you hear us okay, Paul?
Yeah, you guys sound great. You see everything okay?
Sure can, thank you.
Great. All right, so I was going to transition quickly here to policy and funding. I'm going to go pretty quickly through this because there isn't a lot to, well, there is a lot of information here, but it's going to be very detailed throughout the report. So really what I want to mention here is there's a lot of policy driving this adoption. Kind of big laundry list here at the federal, state, and the local level. Different policies that are really pushing this transition. A lot of these are also about the requirement to transition to a clean energy economy. Washington State has the Clean Energy Transformation Act, which I summarized just a minute ago, talking about how what utilities are going to be required to what their transition to a fully renewable energy source is going to look like over the next 25 years. And then the other really big driver of this is the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. That's the bipartisan infrastructure bill the federal government passed last year. There's a lot of money in there to help facilitate this transition. They had $105 billion in there for public transit, $15 billion for EV adoption. So there's a lot of money, I will say, floating around or programmed for the next 5 years to help facilitate this transition, in addition to state and local policy. And again, this is all going to be fleshed out in more detail in the report, and so I won't spend too much time discussing all of this now. And then as well, there's a number of funding sources that WTA might use to help facilitate this transition, given that these costs are so much higher than maintaining your current diesel fleet. WTA has had a lot of success with the FTA low-no vehicle grant. I think you got, Tim, you'll have to remind me what the number is, $8 million, I think, last year to purchase 8 more of these buses. So great job with that. That's exciting to see that. So there's, again, a lot of that money out there right now to help agencies make this transition. All right, so I'm going to switch to the operations analysis. This is kind of the meat of the analysis here, and this is going to start to get a little bit more technical, but please stop me at any point. So when we talk about the operations analysis, what we really did is STV built a model for all of WTA's existing routes and modeled the energy consumption on those routes and how much energy would be required to basically operate WTA's existing schedule. And to do that, we make a number of assumptions. So the first, the top graph there, we're talking about an existing battery pack. So on a new 40-foot battery electric bus, the nominal battery size is 588 kilowatt hours. So that's how much electricity that battery is rated at. It's a lot of electricity, so it's half a megawatt of electricity. But in reality, when you get a battery that size, the vehicle manufacturer basically knocks off the top 10 and bottom 10% of that battery capacity and says that's not usable. And that's to help keep the battery alive longer. As you all, I'm sure, are aware, your cell phone battery wears out over time. That degradation mostly occurs when your charge rate is your state of charge is above 90% or below 10%. That's when the damage to your battery is really done. So pro tip, if you want your cell phone to last a little longer, don't let it die and don't charge it all the way, but I know that's a huge pain. But so essentially we knock off the top 10 and bottom 10% of the battery capacity for service energy when we're doing this analysis. And then, like your cell phone, the battery is going to degrade over time. So we assume another 20% gets degraded off of that. And so we want to make sure that you don't plan for your route to be operable when you have a new battery, but then when your battery degrades, you can no longer drive that schedule and your battery is going to die midday. So we plan for kind of end of life battery capacities when we do that. So the number we're showing here is 376 kilowatt hours. That's what we're calling our service energy at the battery end of life. So really it's 64% of a new rated battery capacity that we're considering usable for this analysis. So this is kind of the worst case scenario when a battery is at the end of its life. We want to do all the analysis at that level. And then in addition to that, I mentioned that the ambient air temperature plays a big role on the range of these electric buses. So we've got a chart below this that's showing basically WTA's existing block schedule. So that's really what a bus does during the day. What is completable during different ambient temperatures? So I've got 2 winter. Yep, go ahead.
All right, we had the thing crashed on this end, so can you pause for a second while we restart?
Absolutely. Yep.
We'll go ahead and print the slide.
Is anybody else having? Everybody else can see okay?
Just fine.
Okay.
Yeah, your have never been interrupted on my end.
Great.
It's the Zoom gremlins.
Yeah, exactly.
Paul, this is Megan at WTA. Will you be talking about kind of average life on those battery packs and when we need to start thinking about replacing them?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. I just wanted to make sure you touch on that.
Sure. I'll wait till the board gets back in here.
So I see the boardroom as currently here as a participant.
Looks like their video's off.
Okay, I just want to note the deep irony that the in-person people are the ones who are having difficulty attending this meeting.
Not lost on me either.
Everyone chuckle.
Duly noted.
I saw Eric Fraser had gone to grab another laptop, so I think they're working on the issue.
Okay.
Also duly noted that the IT director is the one that is in the room with everybody in person.
Ooh, that doesn't work. I'm sorry, anybody know how we're doing?
They're coming in and out of the room and it look, oh, here we go. We can see you, but we can't hear you. Okay, I think it's working.
Oh, you can hear us?
Yep.
Yes.
You
Just
see the
started.
screen okay?
Yep.
Great. So before I dive back in, we got a question while you guys were down about kind of how long these batteries last when we expect you know, them to degrade to this level. And I'm gonna toss this one to Mr. Kaufman at STV to help answer that question.
Real quick, you can actually purchase today a 12-year warranty for these batteries. It's not cheap. Our experience showed it to be upwards of $30,000 to $35,000. It may escalate as Paul mentioned earlier. But since one of them.
So you're a little hard to hear there, Paul.
It's hard to hear.
Yeah, I'm on the wrong speaker. How's that? Is that better?
That's better.
My laptop. All right, so you can purchase 12-year warranties for these batteries now. So our battery manufacturers are fully expecting them to operate within the design life of the bus. We've done that successfully for other vendors as well. So there has been talk in the past, we hear it all the time about midlife overhauls and having to change out all the batteries. We are not seeing that, but please keep in mind that not many battery electric buses have run 12 years just yet. But right now, everything that we're seeing from a technological data input perspective is showing that they should be A-OK, running out a 12-year life, possibly further. And I'm just going to lean on Mr. Bro. Add anything else that he'd like to add to that response?
No, you covered it. The only other thing that I would add to that is that, you know, the extended warranty that you had described, where it would take the battery itself, in terms of financial exposure, out past the useful life of the bus at 12 years. We're seeing pricing of that option itself only amounting to $45,000 per bus. I know $45,000 a bus is a substantial amount of money, but when you consider the price of actually having to replace all the batteries on the bus itself would probably approach, you know, well over $250,000. The $45,000 seems to be the worthwhile investment.
Thanks, guys. So diving back into the kind of the seasonality in terms of completability. So we've got a chart in the middle there that shows two different winter conditions with and without DFH. DFH stands for diesel fueled heater. So one of the things that's kind of done across the industry right now is you strap a diesel fired heater onto these electric buses, which sounds a little weird from a sustainability perspective, but it greatly increases the range in the winter. So you'll notice here, we're showing the percent of WTA's existing blocks. So that's kind of a scheduling term to determine, you know, a block schedule, what is required to service a number of routes on that block. So based on WTA's, you know, public facing schedule, they operate 72 of those blocks. And so we're showing right here what is completable given this existing battery capacity during these different seasonal percentages. So if you note winter without diesel fueled heater, that's operations modeling that's done, you know, in the dead of winter when it gets extremely cold outside. We expect about 57% of your blocks to be completable. If you strap a diesel fired heater on there, that number jumps all the way up to 69%. So it makes a really big difference in terms of range right now, whether or not you have one of those heaters strapped onto the bus. And then you'll notice in spring and fall and summer, you get much higher completability. That just goes to show, again, what the impact of cold ambient temperature has on the bus. You'll notice a slight degradation in the summer compared to spring and fall due to the air conditioning unit, but the drain on a battery from an air conditioner is much less severe than it is to keep a bus warm in the winter. Any questions about that?
I got a question on the blocks. So let's just take spring and fall, 79%. Are you telling us that with an electric bus, 20% of our blocks will never be able to be done?
That's with existing battery technology. So this is if you buy a whole, you know, you switch your whole fleet to electric buses tomorrow, given existing technology, you could operate about 80% of your blocks without having additional vehicles or without having to change your block schedule, that kind of thing. So this kind of touches on the charts at the bottom. So I'm going to talk about kind of what that means here, and it relates to your question. So a block is kind of is like a scheduling term for what a bus or what routes need to be serviced in a block, and those get wrapped up into block combinations, and that's really what an actual bus does during the day. So there are 72 blocks, and those get wrapped up into 49 block combinations or bus schedules. And so that number actually drops to 55% given existing technology. So theoretically, you could complete 55% of your bus's current schedule. So what a bus does during the day, from when it leaves the depot, does its thing all day, comes back in the evening. 55% of those are currently completable given existing technology with no change to your routes or schedule. And that's in the worst case scenario in the winter. And we are assuming the use of a diesel fired heater just because that makes such a big difference to your operation. So you would have one of those, and WTA is using those on their existing electric buses in the winter. It's kind of standard practice right now. So
That's one of our takeaways and trying to communicate is that a diesel is not, or electric to a diesel is not a one-to-one switch out.
Not at this time.
At this time, yes, technology goes, it
Yes.
will get there, but.
Does that count for having additional technology at the stations and being able to charge them during the day, or is that not taking that into effect at all?
No, that would be Yeah, if you had in-route charging, so that's the way you'd have to try to.
Okay, so that, but this does not take that into account. Okay.
No.
This does not take that into account. This is assuming your operations are maintained exactly as they are today.
And it doesn't change any of the block structure at all.
And then, yeah, then that raises the infrastructure costs to put in those charging.
Just another note on the diesel fired heaters, what we heard before, and we might talk about this as part of the emissions portion, is that they emit relatively low amount of emissions, so it's not an excessive amount. So we just kind of want to clarify that it does, obviously it's not completely 100% green, but it's a nominal amount of emissions. They're pretty efficient.
Yeah, we're talking about three gallons a day for one of these diesel fire heaters, roughly, compared to burning, 3 gallons of diesel to travel 10 miles on a bus. So it's not 100% green, but it relatively is much less carbon intensive than operating a diesel bus.
Please remember that it is a furnace. It's not a piston compression ignition engine generating emissions.
Can't hear you, Paul.
I got to keep going on my speaker. Sorry. It's a diesel fired heater, i.e. it's a furnace. It's not a piston a diesel engine where you generate emissions such as particulate hydrocarbons, carbon monoxide, etc. It is a furnace like that is heating your house, and its exhaust is actually allowable into an enclosed area due to FHWA or in compliance with FHWA standards. So the exhaust is negligible. It's very low fuel usage during the course of the day, as Paul pointed out, but take that off and your vehicle range could very well probably cut in half in your winter months, and we just don't want to see that happen.
Part of Paul's point is basically physics. An internal combustion engine is always inherently inefficient because you're trying to convert from heat to motion. Whereas if you're just using heat directly, you have enormous efficiency. So it may not be perfect, but it uses far, far, far less fuel.
It's a very, very good way to say it. So the next thing with the operations analysis, so the takeaway now is about 55% of your existing schedule could be done with existing technology. Question is, what happens as batteries get better? So just for some background, the 2 existing electric buses that WTA has in their operations have a battery capacity of about 440 kilowatt hours. The energy modeling that we did as part of the new existing battery capacity, 588, that's kind of now the new standard. So over the 3-4 years since you guys have taken delivery of your first electric bus, we've seen a 33% increase in battery density. That's the same battery size, roughly the same weight, for roughly the same cost. I mean, obviously the cost of the buses have gone up with inflation and everything, but the density of these batteries are increasing greatly. So we're looking ahead saying, well, okay, what's going to happen to battery energy density in the foreseeable future? And so we have upped that number from 588. You'll see on the left there, that block combination is a takeaway from that last slide. And then we're saying, okay, well, what happens with the future battery energy density of 800 kilowatt hours? So that's about a 36% improvement from existing. So obviously a sizable increase, but definitely not outside the realm of the level of increase that we've been seeing recently. So what happens to your block schedule combinations? So the percent completability skyrockets from 55% to 96%. So 47 of your 49 block schedules or what your buses do during the day then become completable given that battery energy density. And again, this is assuming end of battery life in the winter, worst case scenario. And this is what we're planning for. So there are then 2 blocks that are not completable. The question is, what does WTA do with those? Those would require some sort of en-route charging, operation of a fuel cell vehicle, or changes to your block schedule. The model that STV built also has the capability to do some little schedule tweaking in there. You kind of break those 2 blocks in half and then reshuffle them back into your schedule. And the model shows that with some pretty minor tweaks to your existing schedule, or your driver schedule, not your actual schedule that passengers would see, you could pretty easily get to 100% with a few minor tweaks to the way your buses are operated today. So the takeaway there is that we expect the technology to get to the point where you're going to be able to get to 100%. In the near future, we're not exactly sure. Obviously, we don't have a crystal ball to tell you when this is going to happen. But the industry is expecting about a 5% increase in energy density per year. So if we're looking at 36%, that's maybe 6 years away from where we are today. So maybe by 2030, maybe earlier, depending on how things are going. But that's what we're forecasting in terms of improvement. Questions? Yep.
This word net zero is our goal. What about it is net 5%? Means the last 10% is the most expensive to achieve. We are trying our hardest to achieve from 60 to 70%, or reverse the numbers. How I'm thinking, but the last leg of 10% achievement of net zero, right, is the most expensive, and there is so much uncertainty. I know the slogan we have is net zero. Have you guys looked at that and advised the bodies like us that this is what you are striving to get to net zero word or net 10%?
I mean, we haven't really looked at that. We're just kind of doing an analysis of where the technology is today, where it's going, assuming WTA is going to transition to a fully zero emissions fleet by 2040. Obviously, that's a long ways away. That's WTA's goal. And so we'll talk in the next presentation about what that initial timeline might look like. So I agree that last 10% is going to be the hardest, but we're also showing that we think with future technologies that are coming, we think are coming soon, that last 10% might not be as hard in the future. It's obviously a lot harder right now. If you wanted to go 100% zero emission today, you'd have to almost double your fleet size to do that.
And put in in-route chargers.
Or put in in-route chargers. So it would be a big mess today, but we're showing that in the future we think it's going to be much less of an operational headache.
So just to expand on that just a bit, first off, I want to point out that we use the 800 kWh as just a benchmark indicator in space, if you will. Proterra already can sell you a bus that's at 764 kWh. So the industry is almost there. I'd also like to point out, I love the analogy to the 10%. The final 10% is always the toughest, and it always is. But that 10% is going to continue to move out, is how I would respond to the question. Because the battery manufacturers are well aware that they're in a battle with the hydrogen industry. If they cannot get to that 1,000 kWh magic number, which is where a fuel cell is currently today, fuel cells right around 960, 980, almost 1,000 kilowatt hours, then they're going to lose, plain and simple. So they're driven in this battle, if you will, to continue to build and find increased energy density within an applicable weight. We don't want a battery twice as powerful that's twice as heavy. That doesn't do us any good in the transportation business either. We end up carrying batteries and not people. And of course, we don't want to do that. But that last 10%, if you look at it through my eyes, is going to continue to move out as the battery manufacturers continue to meet increased energy density levels in their designs. You may never see it, because once they get to 1,000 kWh, you're probably looking at a 375-mile vehicle. We're done. That's it. There is no more pure planning. There's no more nothing. You're buying a vehicle that has a 375-mile range, and you could do anything you want with that during the course of the day. Just some thoughts.
And again, that based on WTA's current fleet replacement schedule, that last 10% is not going to happen until 2036, 2037. So we're talking 15 years from now for this technology to continue improving.
Well, Paul, on that Proterra that you said is at whatever that kilowatt is, what do you know how much that costs and what kind of infrastructure you need to support that? Is there any difference in that between what we currently?
No, not at all. Not at all. It would be what we, I believe yours are 4-pack batteries. In other words, underneath your floor, you have 4 of their 110 kWh batteries. They also offer as options 2 additional batteries on the roof. And that 6 battery pack, if you will, can take you to 764 today. Now, Paul mentioned earlier that we got you're going to see about a 5% a year increase in energy density. That's our number. We agree with that. But we're seeing, again, this battery race, for lack of a better phrase, but it's an energy density race. The manufacturers are falling over themselves to try and get their energy densities increased. New Flyer is preparing to release their 625 kWh battery set, which is 100 kilowatt hours bigger than what they currently offer, which is another 100 kilowatt hours bigger than what they used to offer. Gillig is getting ready, one of your incumbent suppliers is getting ready to announce a 23% increase in energy density in the July timeframe this year. We know this because we work with these folks every day, but a 23% jump in 1 year is, well, that's almost 5 years of our estimated 5% a year. So it's a substantial jump. These are Gillig will also be in the 700 kWh level when all is said and done. But again, you have to buy their 7-pack battery, and you could have axle weight restrictions in your state that would prevent that. You might have to back up to the 6-pack battery, less energy density, but again, able to carry the full complete passenger count that you're used to carrying. So we have to measure battery weight against passenger weight, make sure the vehicle is in compliance with all federal motor vehicle safety standards, et cetera, and your local Department of Transportation. I have to say that it's part of the job, but we wouldn't let you buy a bus that you can't operate, or you would operate carrying 12 people.
So Paul, would it be accurate, if we distill this down into one question, would it be accurate to state that the technology will enable WTA, with battery electric bus technology, will allow WTA to operate its current route structure, current blocking structure over time, and procure the right buses to operate those blocks over time? Is that an accurate statement?
I'm comfortable with that. That's an accurate statement. Yes.
The issue is when over time, and how do we plan for that?
But based on our procurement schedule,
right,
it seems like what they're saying, yes, you can do this based on your procurement schedule, your purchase of buses.
That's the key. You got to run your current fleet out 12 years, then you can replace it with an electric. And that's why we had Jason do a fleet replacement plan for you that Paul will touch on, because you can't just park all your buses and turn them over to electric tomorrow. You can't do it. So your existing fleet has to be run out and then replaced with an electric. And that's a phased in over time plan.
And the question that we'll talk about down the road is this in-between time period where it's not to the point where it can do that. Do we purchase through the low-no hybrid electrics to get us through this in-between time period, so for the next year?
So there's another way to think about it, is that our overall aim is to lower carbon footprint or capture carbon. Not that net zero is the only way to do that. I mean, it could be a combination of things. It could be, for lack of things, for every bus, we will plant 2 new trees every year. Like our aim is that how we can lower the impact on our environment. Does it has to be done by net zero alone, or it could be net 10 plus 20 more trees? You get the same end result. And planting 2 trees are very minuscule cost compared to achieving the last 10% on the bus only. Like I'm just thinking loud with this, that it doesn't have to be that this entity has to spend extra amount of money to get to that, but what is the alternate that we can do that? I mean, this is something to think about in 2040. We want to be here, at least I want to be here, but I think that we have to think in different ways that we should not think only in one linear way, that that's the only way to achieve that.
We do have we do have clients that are, if you will, running a competition, hydrogen versus battery. May the best technology win. That's actually that's not rather common. I don't want to say that, but we have more than one that are getting involved in looking at both solutions. But I don't want to drag this out, but I'll just make this point real fast and turn it back over to Paul, is that you're only going to go through this transition process once. In the subsequent replacement of your fleet, whether you go hydrogen, whether you go battery, particularly if you go battery, the energy density will continue to climb over time. I firmly believe that there is a super battery out there. They haven't found it yet, but you can't throw this much money at this technology and not, if you will, stumble upon a fantastic solution that charges fast, etc., and gives us the range we're all looking for. But it's just this transition time coming out of diesel and into a zero emission technology where there will be this need for a progressive resolution and plan, which is what we're working on for you now. Once you cycle through this, charging infrastructure is installed, whatever the case may be, it's going to just be like it is now. Buy a new bus when it becomes eligible to retire. That's it.
Yeah, I do want to be sensitive to time here because I know a lot of folks have a hard stop at 9, so I want to whip through these last slides here, if that's okay. Hello, Jen. It looks like you have a question.
I know we've talked about battery replacement eventually, and that comes, the analogy with the cell phone. I appreciated that. What is the maintenance on the charging stations themselves, and is there, turnover or the life of a charging station? I mean, again, with the cell phone analogy, my connection cord I have to replace usually sooner than my cell phone, but I'm just wondering.
Yeah, I mean, so I guess I'll take a quick answer at this. There is some maintenance involved with those, but we expect the lifespan of those to be 20, 25 years. We don't expect those need to be replaced frequently. All right. So what we're showing here is the electrical demand at Moab, at your main facility there, assuming the full conversion to an electric fleet. So what we're showing, I'm going to focus on the graph on the right there. So this is showing on the y-axis, the vertical axis, the power draw that would be required to charge your vehicles, and the graph across the right on the x-axis is showing time of day. So the graph starts at about 5:30 in the evening. This is when a lot of your fleet's starting to roll back in the evening. What happens to the electrical demand at your fleet, assuming all these buses are coming back and you plug in? So we're showing two different scenarios here. We're showing what we're calling first in, first out, FIFO, that's in red. That's basically every time a bus comes back, it plugs in and starts charging at full and charges until it's full, and then it stops charging. So you see this massive spike at 9:30. So you're going to be drawing over 3 megawatts of electricity at that point. That's a huge amount of electricity. Puget Sound Energy is going to charge you. As that number gets higher, they charge you what are called demand fees. So it is in WTA's interest for two different reasons: to keep that demand fee down and also to minimize the amount of transformer upgrades that are necessary to flatten that number as much as possible. So we're also showing an optimized curve on here. And this is you bring your bus back to back to Moab at the end of the evening, and you know it has to leave at 5:30 at night, you could, or it has to leave at 5:30 the next day, so you've got 10 hours to charge, you could delay that charge for a couple hours. And so you use something called the charge management software, which takes all that input in and optimizes the charging and attempts to flatten that curve. WTA already has a charge management software, but we're showing what would happen essentially is if you, for the load profile here, if you use one of those, that really helps flatten your curve down to about 1.5 megawatts. So it cuts the the max load basically in half, and that's a really important consideration for how you charge these things. You want to be smart about it to keep your costs down. And then the graph on the left there is showing a similar thing, is showing what happens to the your fleet readiness compared to your schedule requirements. If you charge as soon as a bus comes in, that's the red graph. So the buses start charging 5, 6, 7 o'clock when they come in at night and charge as quickly as possible. A lot of them are ready, full fleet readiness at about 3:30 in the morning. But in terms of scheduling, you don't need that until much later in the day. So what happens if you bump that schedule, that charging schedule, a little closer to when the fleet is required? That's what that graph is showing there. So any questions on that? All right. Do we want to try to quickly flip through these? I have 2 slides about site upgrades for each technology, or do we want to pause it here and we can include this in the next presentation?
I think that maybe we would need to pause.
Okay.
Les, do you agree?
Yeah, it looks like we just lost Ali, and then Jen has to take off for a meeting. I know somebody else had a hard stop as well, so that seems like a good thing. For next steps, there's a couple options on the next meeting. We can do another special meeting because this seems to take another hour to do. We could extend the meeting on the 20th. There is a meeting on the 6th. There's a number of people, including me, out for spring break. But we could discuss factual things and save the kind of the course of action discussion for a separate meeting. So that would add a 3rd meeting. So those are kind of the options. Again, a special meeting in April, go over the factual stuff on the 6th and save the course of action discussion for a 3rd meeting, or extend the 20th by 45 minutes or an hour.
Are there some deadlines as far as decision making that are approaching?
No, the only, it's more of the short term, midterm decision that we need to make. So we have an order of buses to replace the hybrids that will be coming up, and we have an opportunity to apply for a Lono grant for electric hybrids.
What's driving the timeline?
Well, it's a short term. Yeah, it's this medium thing rather than the long term decision. What do we do over this next time? And then in order, we'll have to make a decision on the technology, hydrogen or electric, probably by beginning of 25, end of 24 timeframe, in order to build the infrastructure to accept the buses, the electric buses, so they're ready to go in 27 to hit a 2040 timeframe. But the immediate, if the one of the decisions that could be taken off is if the board's okay with us ordering hybrid, the diesel or the electric hybrid with the Lono to replace this, then we can move. That's the biggest short-term 5-meter target that we have to hit. Because that application is due the 13th, but we want to get it a little before that. So if the board's okay with us moving forward for a replacement on that, we can, that removes the immediate 5-meter target.
Board members?
I guess I'm fine with that. Seems like a good plan to move forward at this point, knowing that technology is changing quickly and we got our plate full at the moment.
Yeah, it buys us some decision space.
Yeah.
need a motion?
No, just if the board's okay, because we would just apply whether we get it or not, who knows? Because it is oversubscribed. Okay.
I'm going to think we need to, Les, thank you for making this explicit at this moment, but I think we're going to probably need to bring that up again at future board meetings, just to make sure that the board really does understand what the administration is proposing.
Okay. Can do. So as far as continuing this discussion, would the board like us to find a special meeting date in April? Extend the 20th meeting by an hour, or do factual stuff on the 6th and then save the kind of the options going forward for the half hour on the 20th?
Board members, go ahead, Todd.
Yeah, I'm time constrained on the 6th, so this is just me, but so the other two options work better for me, but that's just me.
It feels to me like if we could find a special meeting so as we stay focused on this would be great.
And the week after the 6th.
I agree.
Would be good if you could do it that week. The following week, I'm going to be gone, so.
Okay. So if we shoot for a special meeting the week of the 10th, recognizing there are city councils and potentially county council meetings working around that.
Yeah.
Okay. If that's okay, we'll move forward with that option. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Sorry this went long. It's an important discussion. I really appreciated, Paul, your presentation and the rest of the discussion. Seeing no further business, this special meeting of the WTA Board of Directors is adjourned. Thanks again, everyone.